And so when we look at cannabis, many of us, we look at it again as a way to repair. So we're talking housing, we're talking schools. A couple of years ago, there is so much cannabis taxation in Denver that none of the schools could actually accept the money because they didn't spend the money that they had before. What school district would love to have that problem? Right, right. All of our school districts would like, oh yes, no, we can't take that money. We're good. We got all the teachers, all the training, everything. Same thing with housing. We see it as helping and supporting health care, transportation. And, you know, I know a lot of people talk about generational wealth, but we're going to start talking about generational health, because you can't have the wealth, or you can have the wealth, but if you don't have the health, then you won't even be able to take advantage of that wealth. And so for me, I'll introduce myself. I'm Cherron Thomas. I am an MBA candidate at the University of the Science in Pharmaceutical and Healthcare with a concentration in cannabis. The University of Sciences is a 200-year-old pharmaceutical school. It's the first school where a PhD was given in cannabis. Yeah, first school back in, I think, 1898 or something, I forget. But it's the first school. Eli Lilly was the person that received that PhD. So I say this to say it is nothing new in this industry. It was a thriving industry prior to the marijuana tax laws that happened in 1934. So this was an industry where people would go into the pharmacy, buy what they needed to buy, grow what they needed to grow, because for a lot of people, it really encapsulated part of their wellness protocol. Even today, for a lot of people who are not diagnosed, it's still a part of their wellness protocol. Auntie knows that my arthritis feels better today because of this. You know, Cousin Joe knows I'm not tripping and going off on everybody today because I've had my medicine today. True story. A plumber came to my house once, and I think he probably saw a little leaf or something, and you know, didn't know him from the can of paint. This guy's from the Northeast, and if you know Philly, you know Northeast is like a working class white, you know, area, also known for many racist attacks. And so because he saw this leaf, now this kind of, you know, tension-filled, like, why am I here, why are you in my house kind of energy just dissipated. And one of the things that he shared with me was that, yeah, I smoke. He was like, if I didn't do this every day in my basement, I probably would have killed my family by now. True story, right? I'm like, oh, you know, but undiagnosed, but at least he knew what kept him sane. And I had to tell him, well, you know, there's a medical marijuana program in our state, and you can apply for a card, and so on and so on and so on. So all that was like actually new to him, which is why those of us who are here, we do what we do, because we understand that there are many communities who don't like have a clue of what this looks like and what it can look like. And so for us, we're coming out of a space of healing our communities. Every year for the last 5 years, I've hosted a conference at Temple University called the Cannabis Opportunities Conference, which is a free conference. Yeah, it's a free conference where for 2 days it's cannabis education. And it's so important, again, that we continue to have these conversations, because the stigma is real. Yes?
Where'd you say that conference is?
It's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's September the 22nd, 3rd, and 4th. And because of COVID, we kind of grew that in person into a virtual, and it's called Black Cannabis Week. So people all over the country have different events. So wellness, well-being, well. The state of being comfortable, happy, healthy, or happy. That's where we all want to be. That's where we all deserve to be. Some of us have challenges with that. I don't know if anybody has seen this, the 6 dimensions of wellness. Like, this is the natural state of being. So starting off with number 1, emotional health, emotional wellness, the state of being comfortable, healthy, and happy, which encapsulates wellness overall, because I think a lot of times when people hear this word wellness, that emotional state is what we are kind of thinking about. We think about meditation, we think about yoga, we think about, being at peace in many ways. Occupational wellness. Well, this dimension recognizes personal satisfaction and enrichment in one's life through work. Like, what is it to live every day and in your life's work purpose? I mean, that is the ultimate. Some of us in this room are probably there, and some of us are still striving to get there. My favorite one, which is the physical dimension, which recognizes the need for regular physical activity. If I do not run, if I do not walk outside, if I'm just I'm just feeling it here, I'm feeling it all over, I can't function properly. And I tell people, even if you don't have a physical program, just think about getting outside for 5 minutes a day. Increase that to 10 minutes and so on and so on. The social dimension encourages contributing to one's environment and community. And I think that's what we are here when we look at the discussion of cooperatives. It's like we are fulfilling this dimension of wellness by us working together in community, because we're human beings. Nobody can live on an island by themselves. So we sort of reach out to this community so that we can work and build together. The intellectual dimension, which recognizes one creative, stimulating mental activities. How many artists, how many creators do we have in this room today? Yeah. It's just an extension of the creator, and this is how we're able to express it, is through that. And we all have it. Some people have it more than others, but we need that as human beings. If you ever saw, people doodling, when I was in school, people would just doodle. We had time back then, and sometimes the teacher wasn't talking or whatever, and we had time. Now I know everything is just like that. So you don't even have time anymore just to doodle. But that was part of that intellectual dimension. And then the spiritual dimension, which recognizes our search for meaning and purpose in human existence. It's like that spiritual part of us. Sometimes we don't know why, but we need to hymn. We need to, just say thank you. We need to, that's that spiritual dimension that's working through us to say, this is how I'm being well today. This is how I'm taking care of my wellness. These 6 dimensions of wellness, I think this came out in the 40s. So now there's a new dimension that has been added in light of global warming. We have environmental dimension. And so that is something, for us, I think all of these work into that. And this is from the nationalwellness.org. These are people, everyday people like you and I, who have found challenges with their wellness and decided that they would include cannabis as part of their wellness regime. The first person is Dr. Odomusu. He's the first doctor who has created a cannabis product for children with autism. And it is sold in dispensaries throughout Pennsylvania. Dr. Odomusu found himself as a young PhD candidate, and I forget how many different sciences it was, but he would stay up 24 hours. He couldn't sleep. And one time, I think it was almost 48 hours, and he still hadn't slept. He's studying, working, things always on his mind. You know that's not healthy. You know that's not well. So one day, his friend said, "Hey man, you need to smoke this." "Oh no, I can't do this, I can't do that. You know, I come from this Christian family, yada, 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 yada." First time he was able to sleep was after he consumed cannabis. And Dr. Odomusu went on, and like I said, was one of the first groups to open up a dispensary in Pennsylvania, and now he has an international cannabis company that's out of Australia. This person in the middle was a good friend of ours, and I say was because he's now passed. But Sean was a veteran. Sean was also a cop. Lot of trauma, on top of the PTSD. Sean was an advocate. This is us in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Sean was an advocate for cannabis. Why? Because he knew that if it helped him, it would help other veterans like him who were committing suicide. Because he said if he didn't, he would be one of those statistics as well. The other one is our state rep in Pennsylvania, Chris Rabb. Chris Rabb was running for his first seat in Harrisburg. He had a young campaign manager. They were departing after a great community meeting. "See you later, man." So that young man walked one way. Chris and his assistant walked another way. Within seconds, he heard gunshots. They ran into the store, the closest store where he could shelter this young woman. When they came back out after they heard the gunshots had ended, he realized that that was his young campaign manager laying dead on the ground. State Rep Rabb, traumatized, a form of PTSD. And it wasn't until he became a medical marijuana patient that he felt whole again. This is my sister, Donna. I met her at a conference. Her daughter was born with half her brain, and she said when her daughter was born, she asked the hospital, "What can I do?" And they said, "You can prepare for her funeral." She saw Dr. Gupta on TV, and there was this cannabis film or cannabis segment on CNN. She said she prayed about it. She's a scientist. Let me look at this stuff because I want my daughter to live. Well, that was 16 years ago. 16 years ago, okay? And then we have this young man down at the bottom who was convicted. This is us giving him a lawnmower after kind of raising some money because he was having challenges after he came home finding a job. But he knew how to cut yards. He knew how to cut yards, so we bought him a lawnmower, and some other equipment so he can get his game going. But this is someone who, our DA in Philadelphia, Larry Kravitz, who was instrumental in his release, because as we look at this industry growing, we still have people like him who is still incarcerated. And we're saying, no, that can't happen. I'm glad that I live in a city where we have a DA, where we have elected officials who understand that those who have been incarcerated for cannabis should be released. They should have their records expunged. Let's see if this is gonna play. All right. So this is like that Michael Moore when it was like all the ingredients that's in your food. So this is like all the ways that cannabis can help. Let's see if it will play. It's like, it's going kind of fast, but it's like 100, there are 178 known, that's known because the research is still small, but known reasons that people should use cannabis. In my state, there are about 34 reasons that you can actually qualify for a medical marijuana card. So I believe you me, that probably everybody in here knows somebody with one of these conditions. With one of these conditions. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, I know in West Virginia, if you get a medical marijuana card, you give up your Second Amendment right.
That's a good, you know what, and that's in a lot of places. However, those people who do already are already registered as a carrier, they sort of are grandfathered in. So I tell people, if that's your situation, yeah, get it first and then register like that. And then I also tell people, like, if you consume cannabis for your safety, make sure that you do have a medical marijuana card, just overall for your safety. Okay, so he was asking about the carrier being able to carry a gun.
No, but you just said overall for your safety, get a medical marijuana.
Right. And so in New York, you're fine because New York, so first of all, we have what we call medical marijuana states, and then we have those states that are adult use states. New York is now an adult use state. So in New York, you're fine. Virginia, which is, well, no, that's not a good example. Yeah, because they still all over the place. I'm just gonna say Pennsylvania, get your medical marijuana card. Yeah, right, exactly. Just get your medical marijuana card, because if you do have product in your car, you need to be able to say like this, you know, here's my card, and that's it. So we understand when it comes to wellness. I'm sorry.
These cards only good state to state?
Well, some states have reciprocity, like in Pennsylvania. We can come to DC. We can go to, I know DC, and I'm not sure what other states, but I think there are like 5 states that Pennsylvania has reciprocity with. But most states don't have that. So like our closest neighboring state is New Jersey. We don't have reciprocity, in New Jersey. So people would actually have to come down to DC if they wanted to go to a medical marijuana facility. Yeah. So our right to be well, we know, again, this is a historical and a traditional right. In 2019, pre-COVID, I was invited to the UN. And part of the reason of that was to sort of like advocate, lobby for rescheduling of cannabis. So that did happen. It didn't happen when we were there. They tabled it. But one of the things that was really interesting when I was there was the group that was from India. So when the UN Charter was changed, again, I didn't get into that because that's not a part of this presentation, but to talk about the racism and why cannabis was actually deemed illegal. But one of the groups was a group that was from India, and they were one of the two groups of people in the world that could legally grow and consume cannabis. And I say consume is it's not the only way. There are so many traditional ways that people utilize cannabis. If you look at the Ibris in ancient Kemet, you will see the graphics. You know, the ancient Egyptians showed you everything. And they even showed you the reasons that you could actually use cannabis. And this is dating, you know, millions of years ago. But it was just interesting to see that these people had a traditional right to utilize cannabis. And I'm just gonna keep going because I have 6 minutes, and I'm like, on slide 5. On slide 5, I'm like, ooh. All right, so, and I just wanna also just leave, you know, some time open for questions. So again, you know, this presentation is on wellness, social justice, as well as economic justice through cannabis. So the access to this plant is very limiting for a lot of people. We are calling for access. Part of that access is people being able to have the right and the ability to grow. Equity, which is that very, very like difficult part in this industry, because there aren't that many social equity programs that have worked where it really has allowed for Black and brown and BIPOC people to just be involved in the industry. And then the inclusion. I think I have some statistics in here, but the inclusion is very, very rare in the whole entire industry. And this is a man named Vernon. Vernon has 3 dispensaries called California Cannabis. So when we talk about social equity, this man has done it. Vernon has 2 federal offenses. He was locked up, I think, a total of like maybe 10 years. Vernon, as he say, he was the person that they talked about in NWA, they was talking about him. Snoop, they was talking about him. Vernon was able to come out, and one of the things that I learned from Vernon is that when he came out, he said he was like, I was at every state meeting, I was at every elected official's office. He was like, after a while, everybody knew who I was. They knew my name. But Vernon did the work. He understood the assignment. Like, if I am going to be legal and not, you know, because this thing is changing. I've been locked up all this time, but this game has changed. He decided that this is what I'm going to do. And that's what he did. And so, like I said, you know, when I think about social equity, I think about Vernon because he got everything that he needed. And it's still a struggle because this is an industry that is not financed by the banks, okay? But he did everything that he could, and he got everything that he could get to start his 3 dispensaries, because somebody like him is not supposed to be successful. He was locked up twice. Yeah.
That was for non-cannabis offenses.
No, one of them was.
Was a cannabis
Yeah,
offense?
yeah, one of them was. Yeah. I can tell you his story, but yeah, one of them was. So the inclusion, of course, you know, it's challenging. So these are just a couple of statistics. And so this is Dr. Shonda Maceo. She actually had one of the first dispensaries in DC. She is the Zulu Queen. or she was the Zulu Queen of Louisiana. We just spent some time down there last month where Southern University is the first university, HBCU, to actually grow and dispense cannabis, and she's part of that team down there. But this $3 billion of enforcing cannabis prohibition, it just like makes me sick, because I think about how many places could any of us doing this work use $3 billion. So just a couple of more stats when it comes to the economics of it. First of all, there are so many more jobs in cannabis besides opening a dispensary or growing. If you are an accountant, if you are an attorney, if you are an educator, if you are a caregiver, you know caregivers can dispense cannabis now in Pennsylvania. Like if you work in a nursing home, that's a whole ancillary service right there. You want auntie, grandma, grandpa? Okay, we got you. This is what we do. Okay, and real quick, in Pennsylvania, the cannabis jobs have been growing. Not only are they growing in the country, but they are growing in my state of Pennsylvania compared to all of our bordering states. The last time I checked the numbers, this was in February, there were 368 open cannabis positions in Pennsylvania. There was 201 in New York, 55 in Delaware, and so on and so on and so on. So it just shows you the growth of this industry. And how many people in here had an essential job or service where you had to work during COVID? One person. Okay. Well, the whole entire cannabis industry was an essential. It was essential. Okay. So that again just shows you where we are in this industry. So again, I mean, as we talk about this, and we've looked at how much it costs and some of the challenges within this industry, if you're thinking about this, we just want to say, hey, you know, form your team. First of all, before you form your team, find out the regulations in your state. Because I know you said you're from West Virginia, somebody's from DC, somebody's from Pennsylvania. And so you need to find out what the regs are in your area first before you start making moves. I've known people who have moved to Oklahoma. I know people who've moved to Nevada because where they were, the regs were not in their favor. So if you're flexible like that, that's a thing. Again, you know, make sure that you create the roles within your team, write the plan, and most importantly, find that common goal and commit to it. So again, I want to invite everybody to the 5th Annual Cannabis Opportunities Conference in Philadelphia, and Black Cannabis Week, which is the 18th through the 25th. I have some cards, and you know, you can also find us on social media. Unfortunately, I will be around. I don't have time for questions right now, so I am just going to let Shakia come up and talk more about what she did in Boston. So, Boston, Massachusetts, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, the whole entire state. Not let me not limit her, but Massachusetts.
Okay, I hope I can connect this. Hi, everybody. We are, this cord, I don't know where this one goes. I might just have to log in.
So I do have time for questions.
There you go.
Yeah, so are there any questions based on anything I said or anything that came to mind? Okay.
HDMI.
Do you,
I don't think that's
your,
it. That's a USB, but this is it, but it's not. I don't have that port.
started a cannabis
And what state are you in?
West Virginia.
You're in West Virginia. I would definitely say tap into, there are several organizations that you can tap into, but Minorities for Medical Marijuana is one. They're a nationwide organization, M for MM, I don't know if it's .org, but Minorities for Medical Marijuana. If you tap into that, they definitely have resources, as well as NCIA, which stands for the National Cannabis Industry Association. They are the largest, and they have a specific wing for social equity applicants. And I say social equity, everybody doesn't need the equitable support, but it's good to have the information. But those are two organizations that come to mind.
What was that second one?
NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. Yeah, so those are two national organizations that come to mind, yeah. Did anybody have any expectations from today's presentations?
Samples.
That would have been perfect.
We get that a lot. One time I had some tissue, like some tissue packs, sampling, and one lady was like, "Is this gonna get me high?" I was like, "No, man, it's just tissue. It's just tissue." And you can see, like, even from my presentation, I barely even used a leaf. So, again, for us, we definitely want people to understand, like, the depth
Yes.
of this industry. Yeah.
I had a question.
Okay.
So in New York, we're in the period of commenting on the implementing regs. And so I wanted to know, is there an area or some advice you would give us on items we should comment?
In New York.
Yes. That the regulators, things that we as people in the co-op world and in this, for the social equity applicants in particular, to
Right.
make sure, like one of the factors, like they're saying, how they defining folks is like, if you've been convicted of a marijuana offense, and as you see, 43% of all arrests. I used to work in that criminal justice office. I know that most marijuana arrests are not ending up with convictions, which means a jury or a judge convicted you as opposed to a plea. So that kind of thing. Is there any area?
Right. So I will say that, what did you say?
I want to make sure I understand.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Because I may be able to answer.
Yeah, but areas that we should comment on as they're developing the implementing regs. We have a group
Right.
that wants to make sure that the social justice applicants
Yes.
that the rules are implemented in a way where the social justice applicants actually get to take advantage of the right to get licenses.
Right.
And
So
how
what-
they're defining them, we're finding somewhat limited. So that's one thing we've recognized by them saying convicted of marijuana offense. We realize convicted means only people who have been
Right.
convicted by
Right.
a judge or a jury.
Right.
Meaning anybody who took a plea
No.
is not covered.
Right.
So that's one of the things that we want to make a comment on. Like, we feel this is very narrow.
Right.
So,
But I think that's your comment. Yeah, I think that's your comment. Because when you think about it, right, yeah.
There actually is a regulatory board in New York, and that board is not totally formed yet, but that board is also supposed to be being formed
Yeah.
by people of color.
that's who, and they're who, like, one of their people, we have a group called the marijuana working group.
Okay.
So one of them came and kind of told us, not
because we worked with one of the attorneys with, the, Drug Policy Alliance, who's been drafting legislation for over 20 years to kind of come up with what New York has now. And so hopefully we'll have that same, template in Pennsylvania. But I do like the fact that in New York, a lot of the groups, sorry, a lot of the groups are coming together and addressing and working on these things. I think I just saw recently, a couple of weeks ago, that if you had a hemp license, then you could also have a portion of that, to grow, THC products. It was
It's just
like,
slow.
wow, I mean, like, they are just keep coming out with stuff in New York.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, if anybody is in New York on April the 30th, we are having, an event, with Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn. It's like a block informational event, on April the 30th, so everyone's invited. It's a free event. We don't want to call it a block party, but it's a block party. But it's a block party.
I just wanted to add something onto your question. So, Massachusetts had 3 areas of criteria for those coming into our social equity program. You only have to meet 1 to get into it, but one of them is being convicted. And what we came across continuously was people that were convicted without finding. So you want to make sure to include that too, because a lot of people, like you said, are not just convicted, right? They're arrested, they're stopped, they plea out. And so you definitely want to make sure that language is explicit in thinking about who you're excluding when you're thinking about just a conviction.
Yeah. Yeah, because those pleas, like in the immigrant community, you know how many people ended up deported?
Right.
Because of those pleas? And yet, they were all excluded from the benefit.
I mean,
Why is
and
this
we
happening?
really, we know that we have these pleas because people want to get on with their lives. You know, so
And it's
this is going to be
expensive.
shorter than this. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's why they, you know.
Everybody
it's a
see my
game. It's a
thousands
game
of
and it's our
messages.
lives. So, you know, it's just really.
Okay, if
unfortunate.
this doesn't come up, I'm just gonna get started.
I'm gonna ask this real quick.
Yeah.
Can we get your slides, because you mentioned in your form, your
I
plan,
will.
I thought a lot of
Yeah.
those points you put in those slides, folks could use to sort of justify parts of the plan,
Right.
like parts of the need, like those were some really strong statistics that you put in there, so if you could share those slides with us, I think that
Maybe
would
if I
help
put
us.
my computer on
Yeah,
the ground.
I will pass around,
There we go.
this little notebook thing, and you can write your, your email on here.
I don't
If
know.
you want it.
Hopefully this works.
So, fingers crossed.
Here we
that
go.
it
Yay. Here we go. Okay. Let's get started. Thank you, Cherron. I'm going to continue on a lot of the things that Cherron shared and kind of go more in depth in terms of equity, what that means, what that looks like, who that leaves out, who that includes. But first, good morning. I'm excited to be here with you guys. I think this is the first time I spoke in person since like 2020. So this is cool. But my name is Shakia Scott, for anyone who missed it. I am a Boston native, sans the stereotypical Boston accent that everybody thinks we have, unlike Baltimore. But I currently and newly reside in Philly, so that's how I met Cherron, organizing around cannabis legalization in Pennsylvania. But for some background relative to why I'm here today, I am currently a organizer of the PCBA, or the Philadelphia Cannabis Business Association, which we call it. And I hope everyone can see this. Is this on full screen? It's not. Can I go to the next one?
Oh,
There we go.
you got
But
it.
how do
Okay.
I make it full screen?
Full screen, okay. Let's see.
Let me see something.
Is this an O'Neill question? The full screen? I do know you can do this and that to go back and forth.
Yes.
Okay.
But I can't see the whole thing. Is there a
You
zoom?
can change the zoom.
I know, but
The three dots at the top right.
Oh, right here.
the top won't come out.
We're Mac people, so this like always throws us off when it's like
All right, let's
we hear clicks and stuff. It's like, ooh.
see. It's not working. I know. Well, it's okay. I'll talk through most of this anyway. If anybody has questions.
I think you might have hit this button by accident.
You think so?
No?
Nope. I think it's because I shared it with myself, but that's okay. I know, let me see. Nope, no finger squeeze. Yeah, well, that's weird. You said control? Nope.
He said it happened when you put your phone up there.
It didn't. Oh, man. Well, you can basically see a bunch of it, so we'll talk through it, and I'll just adjust this as needed. I'll adjust it, just so we can get through it. I don't wanna, we have a lot to talk about. So I am an organizer, along with Cherron and a few other individuals from the Pennsylvania area. It is a nonprofit focusing on pushing legalization and repair, which you can see here. And repair calls for reparations, expungement, policy and political mobilization, abolition, inclusion, and reinvestment. Previously to being an organizer for the PCBA, I was the inaugural Director of Equity and Community Outreach for the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, or the CCC, so I don't have to keep saying that long name, which is the regulating body of both recreational and medicinal use cannabis in the state. So the commission was organized, or formally organized in the September of 2017, and I came on at the beginning of 2018. So from 2018 to 2020, late 2020, basically 2021, I defined equity for the state. I developed, oversaw, and advanced the vision, strategic plans, and mission related to equity programming, and community outreach. This included, but was in no way limited to, creating and managing Massachusetts' first in the nation statewide equity program. And I want to just hone in that Massachusetts has the first statewide program, but shout out to Oakland, they have the first equity program ever at the city level. I also oversaw the commission's equity work plan, which is outside of the equity program, diversity, equity, and inclusion work groups, the Citizens Review Committee, which made recommendations on tax reinvestment money and where that would go, and I sat on the Sustainability Committee, which if people submitted applications and they had previous convictions and it rose a red flag, that application would come to our committee and we would decide if they would get a license or not. In this role, I clearly promoted equity-based and diversity-based policies and initiatives internally and externally, directly within the communities they are designed to benefit, and I ensured that those policies were aligned with the Commission's overall mission. Massachusetts was also the first state with an equity mission for its commission, and the first state with a equity legislative mandates for our state law. Hold on one second. So you can see them here. This is what we were required to do by state law. And this is how we would be held accountable by the state government in terms of making sure that these mandates happened. So we needed an equity program and we needed a priority review program for economic empowerment. And we'll talk more about that position and why that's important, but that's enough about me. I want to talk about equity, right? That's why we're here. What is equity? Social equity, and will it ever work? So before we dive into whether it will work, right, I think it's important for us to understand and have a clear and concise definition and understanding of what equity is. But before we talk about what equity is, I think it's most important to have an understanding of what equity isn't, right? So are there anyone in here that have ideas about what equity isn't? Do you want to share some? It is. Okay. Well, no volunteers, so I'll just get into them. I have 3 very important things that I think equity isn't. Before we jump into what equity is, right? Equity is not equality as we see here in this image. And we'll talk more about this image because even this image to me doesn't fully represent what equity is and what it means in the cannabis industry. You can see that equality is sameness. You get a tree, I get a tree, but my soil is not conducive to the growth of that tree, but oh well, we both got a tree, right? See you later. Equity is fairness. I get a tree that grows in the soil per the nutrients that my soil will produce for that tree. You get a tree that grows in the soil that you have. Now we've reached this, now we've reached the same starting point. Now we've reached the same starting point, right? And I wanted to talk about this image because I chose this image to represent for Massachusetts because I was sick of the fence image. But also, I think this image demonstrates, and this is important for my number 2 of what equity isn't, that they're receiving things because of their own personal shortcomings. She's receiving a certain bike because she's handicapped. This doesn't show us that there's an outside apparatus, our government, our systems, that created these circumstances and now they need to undo them, right? We don't have an image that shows us that. Somebody broke my legs, so now they're coming to give me a bike that puts me in a position where I can be on the same page with everyone else. I didn't break my own legs. And so that is an important thing to keep in mind about equity, and that's number 2. Equity is not the means of giving people resources or more access to something just because of their own personal shortcomings or they're less fortunate than other people. It's not equity at all. Now, the third thing that I'm going to say is going to be kind of shocking, I think, but it's so important to me, and it's something that I learned a lot in my role in Massachusetts. Equity is not a program. And you'll hear me say that so many times throughout this conversation, and if you see me talk anywhere else, you'll see me repeat that over and over and over. What happened in Massachusetts, once I designed the equity program and it got running, and it's very successful in what it is, but it's not equity. It is a tool to contribute to establishing equity. I look at equity as a big umbrella, right? The little rods that come off of it are the different methods and programs that we use to establish equity as a whole. So no matter how many times you hear Massachusetts first in the nation, statewide equity program, I made it, I created it, I wrote it from application from start to finish, and I will tell you it's not equity, right? And then once you hear equity program, you start siloing equity into that program. So now you hear, oh, New York's equity program. Now you're thinking that program is going to achieve equity. That's not true. That's only going to achieve what it achieves as a part of equity, right? So the program I developed for Massachusetts is, in sense, a workforce development program. It isn't an equity program. It creates equity through workforce development, right? But it's not equity, because equity is much more than that. So we'll definitely get into that, but I want you guys to repeat after me. If you don't take anything away from this conversation other than this, equity is not a program, okay? So if you go tell somebody else you learned something today, it's that. Equity is not a program. Now, what equity is, and I'll come back to that screen. And we were just talking about what equity isn't, right? But what equity is an ideology. It is a set of ideals and actions that we take as a means to first address, and then further prevent the continuation of an inequitable status quo. So we first have to recognize it, right? Oh, we did that. We locked all those people up. We contributed to mass incarceration. We designed mass incarceration. Now we legalized it. We need to go back and undo those harms that we did, right? So you first recognize it, and then, this is where we say again, equity is not a program. Through various methods, not just one programming, not one type of program. Equity is not going to fit into a program, right? So through various methods, we accommodate those who experience those disparities in treatment and have been unfairly targeted and impacted by our systems, not their own shortcomings, right? Equity is also redressing that historic and long-lasting harm done to those specific individuals. So equity, like we talked about here, is repair. Equity is reparations, expungement, policy and political mobilization, abolition, inclusion, and reinvestment. And we'll talk about reparations and reinvestment because those are super important to equity, and they're not the same thing. And when you hear reinvestment, don't be moved to think, oh, we're about to get some money. Because that's not what's really happening. We've seen it, I've seen it personally in Massachusetts. Our tax reinvestment funds went mostly to the police. The same actors, the main actors who criminalized these people are now making the buck off of the legalized industry, right? And so we have to think, we have to understand language. Once they start talking about a new industry, the language that they're using, even the switch in certain communities to cannabis. We're not walking around like, hey, you have some cannabis? We're not really calling it that in our communities. We know what it means, but it's just, you know, I don't want to get too much off track because I will. We can talk about this forever. We can talk about this forever. So we just kind of established what equity isn't and what equity is, right? Equity is an ideology. So why do we need equity? And why does equity in the cannabis industry specifically matter? And let me go up. And this is why it matters. And this timeline down here is for Massachusetts mainly. But you could kind of see a timeline of criminalization, decriminalization, medicalization, and then legalization. But if you look at this image, it covers the extensive number of individuals affected and arrested due to the ongoing war on drugs. And we have to make sure we say ongoing, right? Continuation.
Quick question about these numbers.
Yes.
Does this include the money that's transferring hands on the street? Right?
No.
Right, so there's even more money in this, because once it gets legalized, a lot of that activity is going to come from the dark.
Exactly. And that's a key thing because we also have to think about equity as taking that already existing. This market already exists. This industry already exists, right? When we're thinking about equity, we have to keep in mind that we're not starting a new industry. There's people who are already, that have the expertise on this. And it's not these government regulation bodies, right? What they're doing is kind of pushing you guys to the side and then continuing, one, to criminalize the already existing industry. And we have to keep that in mind in terms of equity. But we see this image, we see 8 million people arrested, this says pot, but for cannabis since 2000. This is a kind of an older image, but I think this is a good time to call in Michelle Alexander's quote as well, and Cherron just touched on this, and Michelle Alexander's quote was a little older, so it's a bigger number because arrests overall have decreased because of decriminalization. But at the time of her quote in the New Jim Crow, half of all drug arrests were made up of cannabis. And possession was 88% of all cannabis arrests. So you didn't have to be smoking it, selling it, doing anything with it. You just had to have it. Now your life is in turmoil, right? So this means that 8 million people are, in counting, because this is a continuing and ongoing war or criminalization of the use of drugs or plants, that are still suffering today from incarceration, stigma, lack of access to employment and other opportunities based on their arrest or incarceration or convictions, and then other collateral damage to their families and children, especially financially, right? That's a setback on your entire life, especially financially, because you make pennies if you get incarcerated. So moreover, we see this quote here by Darlene Flynn, and let me go back. And she points out, the war on drugs is a very specific war that targeted certain communities and cultures. And we know who those communities are: Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino. Massachusetts, in our social equity program and in our language, not in our state law, because you can't put racial terms in state law, but in our language for the commission, we made that explicit. Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, the most impacted. Not that nobody else was, but we're the most impacted. And so what we just did here with this image, and we'll kind of continue to do, is we've started establishing that inequitable status quo, right? That's what equity is going to seek to undo. Certain people, and then 8 million people, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, are continuously being criminalized for the use of this plant. Now here, and this is based on Massachusetts because that's where I'm from, but we see Darlene's quote visualized. We can see the undeniable arrest disparities, specifically in Massachusetts here, for those who identify as Black and Latino. I'm gonna scroll down a little bit. Ooh. Black and Latino, and then you see Black and white, right? I want to point out, first of all, because sometimes people see images like this and say, well, Black people smoke more, or they sell more. No, they don't. None of the images you see, they all represent little to absolutely no differences in use, possession, distribution, or sales patterns. None at all. However, you see a larger number of Black and Latino people being arrested in relation to their white peers. Why is that? We know why that is. One, we live in racist America, but two, we're continuing to establish that inequitable status quo, right? So these, and the terrible thing about this is that these disparities continue and then even worsen, right? Even after massive reductions in arrests due to decriminalization and legalization measures. Why would that be, right? So all of us are getting arrested less, but the racial disparities and the amount of times Black or African American, Hispanic, Latino people are getting arrested still is higher than their counterparts. And like I said, these disparities persisted or became worse regardless of decriminalization or legalization. So that also tells us we need something else. We need equity. And then we need to understand what equity means in terms of legalization. This includes Maryland. Maryland decriminalized marijuana in 2014, but since then, Black people have been convicted 3 times more than their white counterparts or any other group. Any other group. That percentage lessens as you compare it to other groups, but Black people are still the most arrested, incarcerated, and convicted. Maryland actually has the 4th highest arrest rates for marijuana in the nation. In the nation. So I advise everyone, if you can, I'll go back to that, to read, to read or to take a look at. If you put this on Google, it'll be the first thing that pops up. Marijuana in Black and white, billions of dollars wasted on racially biased arrests by the ACLU, and they do it specific to each state. They do this specific to each state. They have this report for every single state. Maryland spends $106 million enforcing marijuana laws just in 2010, placing 9th in the nation of the money spent on enforcing marijuana laws, disproportionately against Black and African American, Hispanic, Latino people. So now furthermore, right, after we're continuing that inequitable status quo, we're seeing that this leads to a lack of representation by those most impacted in the resulting legalized industry. Like, duh, if I'm in jail, if I'm broke, how can I then participate in an industry that Cherron pointed out costs almost $2 million to even step your foot in some states? Massachusetts has taken some steps in other states that I know of in terms of equity to reduce those things, waiving completely application fees for those who are accepted into the social equity program, 50% waived fees on their annual licensing fees, and way more benefits in them. But they also take steps that didn't put those people first, like letting the medicinal shops open first. That's another thing that we leave out when we think about equity. We never talk about equity in medicinal cannabis. For some reason in our minds, those things don't go together, even though we know there's health disparities in our healthcare systems. Medicinal cannabis is a healthcare system. We are inflicted there as well, and we have to keep that in mind. So, how do we address it? How do we address this? Will equity work? Is equity the resolution? It could be. That's really the answer. It could be, right? But what does that take? And there's a lot of things, like I said, I think the first thing is understanding that it's not a program, right? Massachusetts gave me $300,000 for the entire state over 3 years. My budget never increased. The budget for the commission was $14 million. They gave me $300,000 for equity. My program doubled in size the very second cohort. No increase. No increase. Anytime we talked about equity, everybody zoned into that program. That wasn't equity. Massachusetts did take other equity measures. We're not going to leave that outside and above and beyond the program itself. But when you're focusing on a program and you're trying to say, hey, we're doing something, and you're not funding it, are you really doing it? Is it your mission? Is it really your mission, or is it my mission, right? 3 years into that role, I was the director, and I had no staff. No staff. Everyone else's department grew in size except for mine. Every year, people were getting new staff. I had nobody. I literally, with the help of my colleagues in their other departments, where I have to come to them and say, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? Can you do that? Get it done. You have to, right? Because now I feel like you're putting the black face on me. If I feel, oh, she did it. She did that. That was her. So I can't. And I'm not going to fail my community anyway. So, sorry, I went off, but in terms of equity and how can it work, I do also suggest that you guys take a look at Fair and Square, how to effectively incorporate social equity into cannabis laws and regulations. This is by Untitled. She was, I don't, but where did my last slide go? It's not even coming up anymore. But it's called Fair and Square, and anybody who wants to know, I'll send it to you. But Shalene Title sat in the social justice seat for the CCC in Massachusetts. Me and her worked closely together. Basically, we had to fight everybody, tooth and nail, to get everything we wanted to get done. And realistically, Shalene is why Massachusetts has equity. We typically say the social equity program is her baby that I raised. Because when I came to the commission, she had an idea, we need this program. And I said, okay, let me take that, because I know what to do with it. So, in her paper, she definitely highlights necessities for equity, but I personally know equity can work, right? However, it takes a number of things. We talked about a number of them, and some of the things we won't even get to because they're so, I shouldn't say small, but they're so out of people's minds. They're not even thinking of that as equity, right? Because they're thinking of equity as a program. But a few of them I want to touch on is, one, a change in our societal and governmental ideals. We need destigmatization throughout and understanding what that means, right? In our criminal legal system and our interactions and involvement with the police. Why, like we said, would we bring the main actors into criminalization of this plant back into the legalization of the plant? That makes no sense. We have to generate trust between those that were harmed and the new legal system that's being created, and the medicinal one. We need destigmatization in our educational and school systems. Everybody remembers the DARE program, right? We've seen people melting into their couches because they smoked weed. That needs to be undone. We need that in our health systems, in our employment systems, in our data systems. The people that are crafting these social equity programs, me included, what are their biases? Who are they leaving out when they're picking up data and saying, oh, these areas of this state or these certain people should be recipients of social equity benefits? We need to keep that in mind, right? Like Cherron said, we need access. Access is huge to equity. An equity program means nothing if I can't go in the store, if I can't get a medical card because it cost me $1,000. How is that helping me? We need to identify who social equity benefits and the achievable outcomes. Who are the recipients of social equity as it pertains to where you are? Because Boston looks completely different than Baltimore. We know that. It doesn't look like what you guys think it does, but it looks completely different than Baltimore. And so equity looks different there, right? Are the arrest rates higher? Are they lower? Is the population more Black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, white, right? In Massachusetts, we have some areas that are 90% white. They're like, what does equity mean here? But cannabis criminalization impacted white people. It did. We have to keep that in mind too. It impacted us more. But equity still means something in that 97% white town. We need money, and we're not just talking about checks. We need grants, we need funds, we need reparations, and let's make this clear. Reparations are line items in your city and your state government from jump. Your city or your state says, hey, we're going to make this a line item in our annual budget that says these groups are due this money due to a harm that we done to them, right? Then we need reinvestment. Reinvestment is taking the industry, legalizing it, and saying, okay, whatever taxes we make off of that industry, put that back into those communities. So if I was impacted and now I have a business, I'm basically reinvesting into my own harm. Now I have to undo my own harm with my own money from an industry that harmed me first. That doesn't make sense. So we have to keep in mind those are two different things. Reinvestment can also just be for certain businesses. Businesses that are this amount of ownership or this amount of, generate this amount of money, so that it leaves out those people that are harmed so that their business money is not then going back. I mean, everyone should reinvest, but just thinking about it differently of how many different ways we can look at it. That's also equity. We need waived expenses, discounts. We need budgets, right? Like I just told you guys, my budget didn't increase in 3 years. And that's just me, right? Designing a workforce development program. Not an equity program, even though it's called an equity program, it's just part of equity. We need prioritization and exclusivity periods. We need pre-certification periods, and prioritization and exclusivity periods are two different things. In Massachusetts, we prioritize social equity applicants. We prioritize women, or I hate the word minority, but I'm going to say it here, minority businesses, because I think minority is where, yes, there you go. There you go. That's exactly what it is. So I stay away from that. And then, but exclusivity periods are like, there's a town in Boston called Somerville. They won't let anyone that doesn't reside in Somerville have a license for 5 years, and I think they extended it. So if you're not from Somerville and you don't meet their social equity criteria, you're not getting a license there. And that's an exclusivity period. For those that have been impacted, for social equity applicants, etc., you have 5 years to submit your license, get all the help you need, get your business up and running before any big business will come in, period. And that's important. And that also, what Massachusetts messed up doing is that they gave the exclusivity period to medical marijuana businesses first. An inequitable industry. You let come in and start off, so you already started off on the wrong foot. You already started off wrong. I'm gonna keep going, but we need co-ops. That's what we're all talking about here today. Mass has co-ops with benefits. If you have a co-op, you get expedited review. Expedited review is, in Massachusetts, viewed as after priority review, then your application will be expedited into review. They also get waived fees, especially for seed-to-sale tracking. Massachusetts has a seed-to-sale tracking system that every business needs to have. Social equity applicants get that waived completely, but co-ops get it, oh no, they get that waived completely too, but they also get 50% off of other things. Now, a co-op means in Massachusetts, a marijuana cultivator, but it's comprised of different people with different skill sets from different places. So you can be, I'm gonna say Massachusetts cities, but you can be from Lynn or Boston or Somerville or anywhere, and then we come together with our different expertise and make a business so that I, by myself, with whatever other group I have, don't have to come up with all the fees and the money to generate a business. And a co-op in Massachusetts is licensed to cultivate, obtain, manufacture, process, package, brand, and transfer marijuana or marijuana products to marijuana establishments, but not to consumers, all in one business. And they can have unlimited number of cultivation locations. We also need social consumption, because this avoids, well, in Massachusetts we call it social consumption. It's like a bar for weed, right? A place you can go and smoke. Because this avoids the housing crisis that we overlook that the legalized business is creating, right? Because cannabis is federally illegal, if I live in housing, where can I smoke? In Massachusetts, you can't smoke outside. So in New York, you can. So they're doing it right. They're taking a look at things and they're saying, hold on, that didn't work. Let's up that. So New York, you will be able to smoke recreationally outside. But in Massachusetts, you can't. So where can I go? So either I lose my housing, especially if I'm a medicinal patient, what am I supposed to do? I can't smoke in my car. That's on federal streets. You're putting me at an impasse. We need organizations and bodies that regulate these things with equity at the center, not people that, in Massachusetts, I'll say this, there was 5 commissioners, this is structure, 5 commissioners, then directors, and then their staff. The 5 commissioners, basically, we do all the work, we give it to the commissioners, and they make all the decisions. All of our commissioners, 5 of them, 4 of them white. One of them, a disadvantaged group, but the most advantaged of disadvantaged groups, right? So who does that really represent? 4 of them voted no. 4 of them voted no, so we have to think about that. And then I'll end, right, with federal legalization we need with an equity lens. And state and city cohesion. Because Massachusetts legalized and we had all these social equity programs and things, and the cities were like, so? You don't control what we do. We don't have to recognize that person as social equity. Who told you that? So we have to keep that in mind. I did have some things like, I know Maryland's off to a great start. You guys have some bills that include some of these things. But I'll wrap it up. Equity will work if we make it, right? We have to show up, like Cherron said. I forget the name of the person, but he showed up to every state meeting. Yes. You know, you have to show up. You have to be tapped in. But we can't initiate a new industry with old ideals. If we do, we fail, right? So I'll leave it with that. I don't know if I have time for any Q&A, but if anybody wants to reach me, I don't think this is going to come up again. You can email me.
Well, we do have an hour and a half lunch, so I'm pretty sure everyone would.
Oh, yes,
want to
connect.
approach you,
Yes.
For that. So we're going to take Shakia's questions along with O'Neill, Saki, and Russell. Or we can just move the
Oh, yes.
chairs.
And then
right here.
that's my email. That's PCBA's website. It's our landing page for now. We have a brand new website coming soon. And then that's a link to the program in Massachusetts that I created. If you go to the website, you'll see me on it a lot, even though I'm not there anymore. But that breaks down the program in more detail, benefits of it, how it works, things like that.
So thank you so much, Shakia,
Thank
for that
you.
presentation. So we do want you to hear from some of our other presenters who will return after lunch. So Shakia sort of like, laid out the landscape of equity. I mean, when you look at a place like a state like California that has been a legalized state for over 23 years, they still don't have it right. So we know that many times these programs and these systems don't work in our benefit. But we have a concept, we have a model that has worked for many Black and brown communities and marginalized communities over the years, and that is a cooperative structure. And so, Shakia ended, like, will this work? So, and that's one of the things that we want to talk about now and give you an opportunity to ask questions. Will this work? I mean, you see it's very expensive. You see it's very challenging. You see so many different angles between what I presented and what Shakia presented. So, let's ask the question, starting off with Russell Schultz. Will a cannabis cooperative work? Can this work as we look at this landscape?
I can't see some of you, so
Okay.
I'm just gonna move over.
Yeah, you can just come up here.
Yeah, yes, it will work. The answer is yes, it will work. Like a lot of other industries that have been successful in our communities, it's going to take a good effort from us, and in a multitude of different areas. I'm not big on electoral politics, but for this to work, we'll have to have some involvement in that level. Just quickly, my dad is a Black Panther, BLA general, ancestor now, just passed away, but that work was informative in the way of dealing with cannabis and just being strategic. We have to be way more strategic than what we are doing. We are like super lagging behind, and we have these corporations using front and token people. We have a gang of lawyers who use front and token people and finance them and support them with the paperwork and all, but at the end, they actually don't own anything. They are the front and token people for these lawyers, for these corporations, in order to say that they are equitable, say that they are businesses of color, so forth and so on. So I think one of the biggest things, I am part of one of the first black-owned gray market dispensaries in New York. It's called Gifted BK. It's in Brooklyn. And we also opened up Legacy in Manhattan. And we're opening another dispensary uptown. None of these are regulated because the regulation isn't through yet. And so one of the things, as people of color, we are not on top of, in the context of Legacy, dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's, stand on top of these regulatory boards, but also as the capitalist, as the Westerner, as the white supremacist has done in the past with our concepts, with our revenue streams, with our businesses, all the way from playing games to cards to the numbers. They've turned that into Vegas. Those are your businesses. The lottery, that's your business. And somehow they've regulated you away from it. And it's happening now with cannabis. And so in speaking with a lot of the capitalist, Western thinking, ideological people, they are saying, what is wrong with your people? You went through all of this stuff. You know, you come from slavery. We came here and we did the whole, we're going to be pioneers and we're going to go out west during this gold rush. This is your gold rush. This is what the white guy said to me. You guys are supposed to be pioneering at this moment because they have made the rules a lot less, and the smack on the wrist is actually a smack on the wrist now, as opposed to all of the criminalization that we spoke about. But in this wild, wild west gold rush time, we are not in it. And we are also afraid of what the regulation and laws will happen to us if we do the things that the Western capitalist has done in his wild, wild gold rush for our enslavement and for this country and the land. And so it's very important that we dot our I's, cross our T's, and be in the legacy conversation of we have stores, we have businesses, we have collectives, and work that collective angle, but also in this moment right now, because they've set up such regulatory issues that you may not make it to the legacy. And meanwhile, places like DC, and it's important to look at the markets and to know the laws and how they are changing, because DC and the regulation, DC is 6 years into unregulatory. If you're waiting for your license, you're waiting while these white guys are becoming millionaires. They're literally millionaires. After 6 years, they're millionaires, and they are the leaders in this. The people from Denver, the people from New York are going to be the leaders because New York's not going to get it figured out for another 6 years, either, maybe longer. And so what happens to us in these processes? Well, Vegas gets built. And in the process you get, and then the lottery commissions go all the way across the country. And you're just left out of that. So we have to be way more strategic. We have to be way more in touch with what the regulatory bodies are, who's on them, who's getting them on them. What part do we play in? Because in New York right now, that is a big question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, thank you. And this is definitely rapid fire, so we're going to let Sister Saki come up here. I know most of us are from Philadelphia. She's coming from Jackson, Mississippi. And I have to say Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because there is a Philadelphia, Mississippi, that when you're in the South and you say Philadelphia, that's what you're talking about. So I'm going to let her come up and answer that question. I know she has some information that she wants to share.
So Russell and I are going to be talking later, so I'm going to try to answer the question and insert thoughts that came up as each of you have spoken, except O'Neill, although I do know that ag and other stuff is something that we can exchange and learn from and that we need in Jackson, although Mississippi definitely has been, and black folks have been growing food for a really long time, right? Our Freedom Farms folks could learn a lot from you. And that is what we are about and continue to be about. We're about to be, on May 1st, we're about to be 8 years old. And so I'd like to say that compared to a lot of organizations that have been doing base building, organizing, fighting heteropatriarchy, white supremacists, like, we're still a baby. And yet, we, Cooperation Jackson, yeah, we're still a baby. And we're coming up on our 8th anniversary, May 1st, May Day, which is coming up, right? Okay, so one thought that I had when Sister Cherron, I was about to say you, and pointing to you, spoke about the additional health and wellness, the 7th point, I thought about this quote, which I wanted to share with you all anyway, and it's by Dr. Robert Bullard, who is a long-time environmental justice activist and scholar. So, and we use this in one of these papers that I can share. There's no Hispanic air, no African American air, or white air, there's just air. And if you breathe air, and most people I know do breathe air, then that makes you part of the environment. And if you are concerned about the quality of the air, I would consider you an environmentalist. And if you drink water, and most people I know drink water, and you are concerned about what's in the water, then I would consider you an environmentalist. And you eat food, and again, most people I know eat food. This is how he talks. And you are concerned about what's in the food, then I would consider you an environmentalist. If you answered 2 of the 3, then I would say you are an environmentalist. You just might not know it. And so what I would add, because what we're talking about comes from the earth, right? And can be food or not food, I feel like you can insert that there. The other thing I want to say is we've been talking about up north and northeast a lot, and I'm from originally New York City, so I can relate. And then at the same time, I really wanted to take y'all to the south and to the deep south, and so we'll have to do that later. Because a lot of what you're talking about is actually something that down there, folks would love to even have on the books or not on the books and be able to take the opportunity. And at the same time, one of the things that we did when we were carrying on a legacy and adding on to a lot of thinking and strategy with the Jackson Kush plan that Cooperation Jackson comes out of, is identifying where in the Deep South we have opportunities and, you know, what makes sense. So I'm gonna use this as a map. So Jackson is here. You go up 3 hours, give or take, and it's Memphis. You go south 2 or 3 hours, and it's Mississippi. You go east, it's 6 hours to Atlanta, and you go west, and it's the Dallas-Fort Worth area, right? And so Jackson, both through everything, like, is a hub, although it's central, right? Although it is really a small town. And there's the Mississippi River, right? So folks looking at Jackson and choosing Jackson as a place where we start this experiment, and when I say start, I mean like remix this experiment, was very strategic. And the non-regulation that Russell just talked about is one of the things we were thinking about. Like, there are a whole lot of loopholes because the white former slave owners, still, you know, Chamber of Commerce folks will actually do things against their own pocket and their own interest in order to keep the machine rolling, and that has been an opportunity. At the same time, you do have to be prepared, right? So it was 2019, and we were calling ourselves Getting Ahead, by Freedom Farms applying for hemp. Hemp, right? And then fast forward to, I'm saying that like that because we're behind in a lot of ways, right? Even though I hear constantly that hemp is like the new cotton, right? So then 2020, they put it to a vote around medical marijuana, and people have been doing a lot of organizing, especially so-called radicals and what I call like hippie crazy white people that I'm used to because I'm from New York City. And so they took it to a vote, 2020. It was very confusing because it was a two-part question and answer, and it passed. And then like what we have in the South, which is the state, even if you do it in Jackson, the state can say, oh, no, wait a minute. Or if they know that you're planning it, they could say, oh, no, wait a minute. So it passed in 2020. 2021 session comes again. It's up for question. And it's this year, recently, like we're in April now, that it's back on the table. And off the top, there are 4 different licenses that you need. Each one's $25K. And so basically, you have to, / Cooperation Jackson has to come up with $100K, which might not sound a lot if you're thinking about housing, because folks are like, New York City housing, here housing. You could also get a house or a whole lot of land in Mississippi for $100K. And still, who was been thinking about the fact that Mississippi ever was gonna be like, oh yeah, we'll let this start slowly passing in. And so we have to come up with $100K in order to grandfather in being able to do anything, ASAP. So that's the state. Can we do it? So will we do it? I was about to say yes, we can, and then I thought about Obama, and I was like, I don't want to use that reference. Will we is still really a question mark for me, and I think I can say for us with Cooperation Jackson, I think we can, and I don't have the quote, since I don't have my PowerPoint. I'll paraphrase, because in 1907, Du Bois posed a question, which was basically like, are we gonna go the way where we wanna pull up ourselves from our bootstraps and be individual Black entrepreneurs and et cetera, or do we wanna do this together? And the way that he says it, although I have it in my email, I've often had a conversation with him and debate with that quote. And the nuance to me is him posing the question as what actually ends up being better to be wealthy or to gain wealth. And is wealth the question, right? So for us, we're very explicitly anti-capitalist. And when we talk about all the different ways that we can produce or distribute or test or yada yada, what we talk about in Cooperation Jackson is owning the means of production. And a lot of times that sounds to people as very Marxist, and that's okay, because we understand that if we don't have the circle and the chain of being able to grow it in our own way and be self-determined in how we do it, if we're not able to put it on folks' table or have them come pick it themselves, if we're not able to move it around Jackson, Mississippi, and even all the way to Atlanta and all the way up through Vermont, then what? They still own that part. And so, yeah, so for us, it's the means of production, and until we decide to go a different way, Black folks could keep on doing the same thing, looking at policy as the answer, looking at electoral politics as the answer, looking at voting as the way that we can get money in order to do reparations, in order to do this and that. And the next thing you know, I'm like, what is reparations again? There's one more thing. Oh, also, not only can we learn from our own history, which has been long both here and on the continent and everywhere throughout the diaspora. When you talked, Russell, the first thing that came to my mind also was that we're on indigenous land all over Turtle Island. And so you think the casinos are improving the reservations? No. And I've been to what they call Indian country in Oklahoma. I haven't been on a res, and when I hear young people in different spaces and places, especially during the environmental and climate crisis stuff that we've been engaged in, I'm like, damn. I talk about how this generation and the next generation don't know like jack shit about complaining about all these different things, and I grew up in a neighborhood where on the way to school, I sometimes counted crack vials, and I'm like, and then I hear young people and see movies and know it from studying and know it even if I haven't been to that part of the country, because you can see it in New York, you can see it in a lot of places where, and so let's learn from the start of the history of this empire, which was, we're exterminating you, we're trying to exterminate you. Oh yeah, we can do this and honor some treaties and whatever else, and yet some of you are competing with each other around casinos, and then even within their own nation and their own tribe, you have the pitting each other against each other, right? And so I think that there's a lot of parallels between our indigenous family and what we need to like wake up on. I'm gonna leave it at that. And I feel like, Shakia, you spoke to all of that really well with your experience and how we need to think about and do something differently.
Thank you so much. And I think I may have the quote that you're talking about. I think I keep it on my phone. Should we, I keep this in my notes. Should we go the way of capitalism and try to become individually rich as capitalists? Or should we go the way of cooperatives and economic cooperation where we and our whole community can be rich? And that's definitely something that I stand by and live by in this industry. So that question again, O'Neill, do you think cannabis cooperatives can work? And we're up on our lunchtime, so.
I know, and I want to honor that lunchtime because I absolutely think they can work, and I'm going to talk more about it at 1:30.
I like that. All right, so any questions, you can catch up with Shakia, O'Neill, Saki, myself, Cherron, or Russell. So thank you again. Yeah, the afternoon. Oh my gosh, that is too funny. I mean, it does. And then does that match my
I mean, we all can do it. You can't do it. I can't do it. Collectively. Get the business license. I agree.
That we hadn't talked about what I sent you, because that convergence is, no, it's not you. I'm it's not even that. Oh, not the article though.
What your article when I was writing the stuff that I was writing, because that for me was kind of, I said, I'm not going to read that. Airing dirty laundry, trying not to air it too much.
I'm airing mine. You can hold the punches if you want.
Yeah, and so I did.
Not in our
The
residential
pause,
license. Those are done.
because I don't wanna feel like triggered in some other multiple ways that are overlapping with this that we're talking about, and then be like, okay, hold on.
Well, that's not even what I was even talking about. I wasn't talking about the article.
I'm talking about, you know, being like, do I have to resign from an organization that's math-based? Did I ever apply to be non-voting? And I didn't, because I was like, how come, now you're asking me, because I'm married to Kelly? Oh, how come I don't speak? And this is like back and forth, this is like time travel. I was like, when I got invited to apply to be cadre, I was like, no, thank you. And then I was thinking, how come I'm excited about being in a space compared to New York where there's elders, there's intergenerational, and then I'm like, where are the women? Oh, convention time? Huh, okay. So we have a principle that has to do with patriarchy, and you know, and then you keep fucking trying to like, you know, be what is most aligned. And then when it was time to be like, I'm really gonna be out and still do Corporation Jackson, then it was like, let's talk.
Let's talk.
Okay, let's talk. Me and Brandon, and I don't think he would mind me using his name, committed in a meeting, and Zaki has permission. I was very committed to him, and I was, trying to bring back. And then I was just like, I'm not about to let any layer, even Corporation Jackson, drive me crazy. And me and him committed in an after national convention meeting to go through a process for a year. Me and Brandon were like, we'll do a year. And then what happens to the process? And then whatever mine, or whoever, or just be like, let's back the fuck up and just do what we do, or let's do, you know, we took the Lalumbas, Rakia, and Ansar to Barcelona because we had those connections and we're preparing for another round of who's gonna be in office. Got a chance to be in a different space, not with phones, but not without phones.